Oi, pessoal, boa tarde. Sejam todas as pessoas que estão aqui bem-vindas. Estamos muito felizes com esse evento, com a vinda de Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie para o Brasil. Então, é muito bom estar aqui para celebrar com vocês. Esse é um evento organizado pelo Cultura Artística, Megafauna, Companhia das Letras e pelo Fronteiras do Pensamento. Então, queria agradecer a esses parceiros maravilhosos que estão aqui com a gente. Queria agradecer especialmente a Beatriz Veloso, que é a tradutora que vai estar fazendo o simultâneo dessa mesa, graças a Deus. Eu queria passar um recado para vocês de que, infelizmente, não vai ser possível nem autógrafo, nem foto, porque hoje a agenda está muito reduzida. Na verdade, esse evento aqui já é um milagre, então peço a paciência e a desculpa de vocês, mas acho que é uma oportunidade única que a gente queria poder dividir com todos. E vocês receberam um kit com um livro novo, que é o Contagem dos Sonhos, e o lenço de cetim da mamãe, então espero que leiam, gostem, e é isso. Então, vou chamar aqui tanto Luciany Aparecida, que é autora premiadíssima. Ah, esqueci de um recado, desculpa, gente. Pode vir também. Recadinho que eu esqueci é que vocês podem fazer perguntas no papel, a gente vai receber aqui. No final da mesa, nos últimos 10 minutinhos, 15 minutinhos, a Luciany vai perguntar para a Chimamanda. Eu ia fazer uma apresentação de cada uma, mas dispensam apresentações, elas já estão aqui, queremos ouvi-las. Então, novamente, obrigada. Se quiserem fazer perguntas, não esqueçam do papelzinho que a gente vai filtrar, e acho que é isso. Muito obrigada novamente, e boa conversa.
Oi, boa tarde a todas as pessoas. Estou felicíssima de estar aqui. Que alegria estarmos juntas, todas nós, hoje, para esta conversa com a Chimamanda. Estou feliz e emocionada. Chimamanda Adichie nasceu na Nigéria em 1977. É escritora de diversos livros, publicados em mais de 50 idiomas. É autora dos romances Hibisco Roxo, Meio Sol Amarelo, Americaná. Seus ensaios, como Sejamos Todos Feministas, são destaques no mundo. Hoje, ela vive entre a Nigéria e os Estados Unidos. Aqui no Brasil, sua obra é publicada pela Companhia das Letras, a quem agradeço muitíssimo a honra desse convite para mediar esse bate-papo com a autora sobre o seu mais novo romance, A Contagem dos Sonhos. Chimamanda, escrevi aqui as palavras para a emoção não me falhar. Obrigada por sua presença conosco. É sempre uma alegria lhe receber aqui no Brasil, ainda mais nesse momento super especial, que é o lançamento do romance tão esperado. Você nos inspira, principalmente nós, mulheres negras, a ocuparmos esse lugar de intelectual múltipla, que se desloca entre ensaios e a ficção. Bom, então vou começar a falar sobre o romance, que é o nosso lugar hoje aqui. Nesse romance, A Contagem dos Sonhos, você traz 4 grandes personagens, através das quais vamos reaprendendo sobre a complexidade do sonhar. Eu fui lendo, conhecendo cada uma delas e pensando quantas dores as mulheres precisam suportar com orgulho para serem consideradas humanas, dignas de viverem em liberdade. Nessa perspectiva, em um mundo ainda tão viciado pelas práticas colonizadoras, como o machismo, a misoginia, o racismo, sinto que escrever histórias que as mulheres ocupem o centro é recuperar a dignidade de nossas narrativas. Como você chegou nessas personagens? Qual foi o processo de criação para escolher estas histórias?
Well, thank you. It's really lovely to be here, and I also just want to start by saying that you have amazing hair. John, And it's just really nice to be here. I'm happy in Brazil, and I want to say thank you to my wonderful Brazilian publisher. I think just the whole team have just been wonderful, and I just feel like I'm at the right place. So, and so yes, I really think that telling more stories of okay, so I need to take this off. So I'm a bit confused hearing the I really think that telling more stories is important. And I think it's a way of reminding ourselves of our own worthiness. And it's sad that we have to remind ourselves sometimes, but you know, this is the reality of the world we live in. Actually, I was talking to someone earlier today who was asking if I set out to show that Black people are multifaceted in my novel. And I thought about it, and I thought how it's kind of sad that we have to even ask that, because in some ways, even that thinking is shaped by racism. You know, we don't make it a big deal when we say white people are multifaceted, they're different but when it comes to Black people, it becomes remarkable, and there's something about it that I find sad. But yeah, I think writing is a way of taking back dignity. Writing is and I think I want to say a way of resistance, but I want to be careful. I don't mean resistance in that kind of rah-rah way. I mean just in a quiet way of just reminding us of our humanity, of our beauty, of our worthiness, you know? Yeah.
Sim, e acho que esse movimento, nesse romance, você alcança de um jeito magnífico quando constrói a estrutura da narrativa. Nesse romance, vamos ter capítulos que são narrados em primeira pessoa, capítulos narrados em terceira pessoa, e essa personagem, ela vive uma situação de violência e ela vai repetir o ocorrido exaustivamente. Ela repete para a colega de trabalho, repete para o gerente do hotel, para a enfermeira que atende, repete para o detetive, para o delegado. E o romance, esse capítulo está em terceira pessoa. Essa terceira pessoa foi um recurso estético para que a personagem não precisasse narrar mais uma vez em primeira pessoa o ocorrido, ou melhor, a contagem dos sonhos. Você quis contar histórias de mulheres imigrantes para dar dignidade às suas narrativas de vida, e nessa perspectiva, nesse capítulo, ele está em terceira pessoa. Foi um modo de proteger essa personagem?
Or maybe to protect myself. Because that was the chapter that was the most difficult for me to write. And you know, the chapter that I did the most rewriting on, the chapter that I think just the character is the character who I feel most protective of. Like, I love all of my characters, but I love her a little bit extra. And so I feel very protective of her. You know. I don't mind if people criticize the other characters, but I just want them to leave her alone. You know. And so, but you know, it's interesting that you ask that, because, and again, I think when we make our choices, we're not always entirely conscious of why, you know, when you make your creative choices when you're writing. But I know that at some point I felt that if I wrote all of the characters in the first person, that I would probably confuse my readers, because then it would be, you know, 4 eyes in sequence. But yeah, it's possible that there was a level of protection, not just for her, but I think for myself, because I did feel I was very much affected by her story in a way that's, you know, just very emotional. Because I thought about her, and I also thought about so many other women, you know, and in all over the world, who experience sexual assault, but it doesn't end there. In some ways, what you suffer continues, even when you're trying to report what you've gone through. You know, people think you're lying. And I've never understood that. You know, I don't know any woman who wants to be known as somebody who was assaulted. So why would anybody lie about that? But yeah, I mean, I think that whole part was difficult emotionally for me. So I'm sure that the choices I made had something to do with some kind of protection for myself. But I also, the other thing is that I didn't want her to be a character who was only available to pity. And I'm actually borrowing from Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison once said something about she doesn't want to create characters who are only available to pity. And so the kind of character that you're just like, oh, I'm so sorry, and that's all you feel. I wanted her also, she's a person. She has a kind of quiet strength, and she's very wise, and she's the least privileged in terms of class and education, but you kind of get the sense that she sees these other women very clearly. She sees them. And that kind of wisdom I just found very beautiful. So when I was writing her, I was very careful about not making her just someone that you should pity.
E é uma personagem fula, né? É uma personagem que tem uma referência a esse grupo específico. Essa personagem ela é carregada dessa complexidade que ela transita entre questões de classe, raça. É uma personagem migrante, como as outras três, mas que está em outro lugar. E quando eu estava lendo A Contagem dos Sonhos e encontrando com essa personagem, com a Cadi, que é uma mulher fula, como eu disse, eu fui levada imediatamente aos textos do historiador Amador Ampateba, especificamente com o livro Menino Fula. Eu estou lendo esse livro, estava lendo esse autor, porque estou fazendo uma pesquisa, que estou escrevendo um romance situado na Bahia no século XIX. Nesse contexto colonial, o trânsito entre essa região do continente africano e o Brasil era imensa. Por ter lido esse livro, eu sei dessa relação cultural intensa que os fulas têm com narrar a história, os griots, aqueles mais velhos da comunidade que serão responsáveis pela voz. Desse modo, em seu romance, à medida que fui encontrando a história da personagem Cadi, até a cena da violência que ela sofre, sendo principalmente na boca essa violação, tudo isso foi ganhando uma carga metafórica imensa. Assim, eu queria saber se essa escolha dessa personagem, ser fula, teve o propósito de intensificar ainda mais a opressão e, ao mesmo tempo, intensificar ainda mais essa ação do narrar, do contar histórias de mulheres.
I love that reading. I love that. All right, tell us how far gone are you with the novel, because we want to read it. It's very interesting that I also did not know very much about Fula culture, and Fula culture is so different from Igbo culture, from my culture. So I actually did research, and mostly I talked to women. And I talked to women from Guinea in particular, because Fula culture differs. So Guinean Fula, and even the language is different from Nigerian Fula and from Senegalese Fula, which actually is, in the novel, one of the things that happens to her is that when she's being interviewed in New York by the prosecutors, they don't actually see her, because they just bring a woman who speaks a version of Fula that's not her version. So even that means that she's not really communicating with her translator. So there are things that are lost in translation. And, again, for me, that's, if you don't really see somebody, you don't treat them with dignity. So you just think, well, she's Fula, any Fula will do. But I also researched that culture. I was really curious about and storytelling, like you say. I mean, there's a scene in the novel where I kind of wanted to make fun of things a little bit, and the father is telling stories to the children. And I also read about Fula folktales that children were told. But then the mother says to him, well, actually, men shouldn't be telling stories. Women should be telling stories. And I, kind of liked playing with that. But I obviously didn't think of this interesting metaphorical analysis, but I really like I feel like we should tell a student to write about that in a PhD thesis. No, honestly, fuller storytelling, the mouth, sadly, as region of violation. I mean, it's very interesting, right? Yeah, I really, and I found fuller culture very different from mine, very interesting. But really, my choice of fuller was not really, the only reason I chose Fuller is because Kajetu is based on a real person, and that real person is Fuller. Yeah.
Fabuloso. É uma honra conversar com uma escritora, ouvindo essas tramas, as escolhas. Porque quando a gente vai lendo, a gente vai juntando aquilo como mapa, a gente vai supondo que está chegando a um caminho, mas é magnífico essa possibilidade. Vamos ler literatura contemporânea, vamos dialogar com escritoras contemporâneas, que esse é um momento magnífico. Bom, as personagens dos seus romances são transatlânticas. Sua literatura amplia um modo de pensar pan-africano. Nesse, as mulheres africanas são nigerianas, guineenses, em espaços de imigração na América. Suas histórias vão entre opressões, mas principalmente desejos de futuro, criando cenas de revelação de violências contemporâneas que ainda são quase coloniais, visto que repetem o eixo central da colonização europeia, que seria a violação e abuso de mulheres negras africanas. Mas, junto a isso, lemos também cenas de amor e amizade entre as personagens. Assim, Chimamanda, é a literatura uma ferramenta possível para sonhar um mundo livre das opressões?
Oh yes, I've always believed that. I've always believed that books can remind us of what we can dream about. Books can cause a dream to grow in us. So I'm very curious about your novel, right? And because, no, it's true. But also it's because I'm really interested, and I have been wanting to write about, pre-colonial West Africa. And it's because, intellectually I'm interested in that history, but also emotionally, I feel this need to bring dignity to the history of my people, to show that Africa was a place before slavery. I remember reading this history book by an Englishman who said, before the transatlantic slavery, Africa had no history. And I think about my grandfather, for example. My grandfather was born in around 1900, and the late 19th century, so like 1890, whatever. And I think about him, and he was such a wise, just really remarkable man. All of the stories I've heard about him, I'm interested in that world that created him, and I hear stories of pre-Christian Africa and how just incredibly moral people were, right? Even to a stage that I find a bit scary, right? If you told a lie in Igbo traditional religion, you were very scared, because if someone reported you to one of the gods, you might die. That was the belief. And we're talking about just telling one lie, and I just imagine how nice it would be to have that in the world today, especially with the American government. But anyway, just imagine if you lied, you would just die. That would help things a lot. But I'm really interested in this, in your novel, because that movement is also interesting to me. The way that Black peoples are spread across the world, but are still, in my opinion, African peoples. So for me, being here in Brazil, for example, when I was in Rio at the Bienal, and there was a dance performance, and I was almost in tears, because the movements were the same. I just remember thinking, we're siblings, I was so moved by it. And And again, it made me think about wanting to go back and to kind of create this story that generations coming after us will read and know that they had a history, that their people were complex and wise and human, you know, because I don't think we have enough of that kind of going all the way back. So this is why I'm excited about your novel, and you must send it to me when it's translated into English. Because, no, but I think we need more of that. And you think about it, and the way that, you know, you talk, for example, to a child in, let's say, France, right? That child has a strong sense of a kind of historical, historical story. That child can tell you about things that happened in that child's country, in France, 500 years ago. For many of us, we don't really have that. And I think it matters in the way you approach the world. And so it's not that that did not happen for us, it's that it hasn't been documented enough. And that's the kind of project that interests me. I want to be part of that storytelling that brings back dignity to our history, so that Black Brazilians can see, what was Bahia like? How did it begin? And again, I think it's important for us to remember that it began in Africa. The same thing with African Americans. Sometimes I think the conversation about African Americans makes it seem like they don't have a history, but they do. In the end, they're African peoples. So for me, politically, I feel very Pan-African, and my Pan-Africanism goes beyond the continent. For me, it's about all the peoples of African descent, and I'm interested in the histories and how it's connected. So, yeah, just finish the novel, and when you finish yours, then I'll start writing mine.
Ai, obrigada por essa generosidade. Sim, eu acho que, e ainda mais sendo sua leitora, sem dúvida que temos histórias a contar no mundo, e como é importante que a gente volte para esse passado, até para trazer sonhos, para trazer possibilidades de esperanças, tanto para o nosso presente quanto para o nosso futuro. Se a gente pensa a Bahia, por exemplo, é o estado mais negro do Brasil. E a Bahia, no período colonial, é um diálogo intenso e total com a África. Inclusive, se a gente pensa quem é a população na Bahia nesse período. Eu, como leitora dos seus livros, leitora de Toni Morrison, leitora de Ana Maria Gonçalves, uma escritora aqui no Brasil, Eliana Alves Cruz, que são autoras que estão nesse diálogo entre a literatura e a história. Penso que esse é um caminho, então eu estou buscando esse tempo, sim, para concluir esse livro. Bom, pensando essas autoras e como esse trabalho intelectual que vocês realizam complexifica a história das populações negras em diáspora, como é realizar esse trabalho? Como é escrever uma ficção que dialoga com a história política e social de países africanos e americanos?
I never approach fiction writing with a theme in mind, or I think before the intellectual part of my fiction, the emotional part comes first. So what I'm thinking about is love, desire, pity, anger, like, dislike, mood. That's really what I start with. But at the same time, and this is why I think all fiction writing is political, all of it. Because often, when you're a person of color, or when you come from Africa or Latin America or Asia, the understanding is, you write political fiction, but then everybody else doesn't. Everybody does. I think even the act of writing a story is political, And so we are human beings with love and lust and desire, but we also live in socio-political settings. So I'm always interested in how does where we live affect how we love? How does it affect how we dream? And when I was writing my my novel Half of a Yellow Sun, which was set in Biafra during the war, I was very interested in how people who've gone from peacetime, where everything is fine, people like my parents who lived on a university campus where people played tennis, and then suddenly you're plunged into war and people are so hungry that they're eating lizards. What does it do to you inside? What does it do to how you think about love? What does it do to how much you're willing to give up your sense of right and wrong? That kind of thing interests me a lot. And so I think for me, I'm interested in how, and obviously I'm also interested in what, what has affected me personally. So I think if I had stayed on in Nigeria, if I had not left to go to the US to go to university, I think my fiction would be very different. I think I probably would not be as interested in this kind of, transnational blackness. I think I probably would be writing, about Nigerians. But I left and I went to the US and I discovered race because I hadn't thought of myself as black in Nigeria. So in the US, I became black. And suddenly it was this new identity that brought a new layer to the way I looked at the world. Before I came to the US, I think, I thought of myself as an Igbo woman. I thought of myself as Catholic, but that was it. Now I think of myself as all of those things, but also as black. But when I'm in Nigeria, I don't think of black. I don't need to. So in the US, when something happens, and I can tell you, stories that I think all black people understand when you're in a situation, when it's about race. You can tell, you can tell when somebody's reacting to you because you're black. And so when I'm in the US, that's always an option. It's because I'm black. When I'm in Nigeria, I'm thinking this person who's being rude is an idiot. That's all I'm thinking, right? Because I'm not thinking that it's about race. But anyway, but it's just to say that leaving Nigeria made me much more interested in these kinds of dialogues. How do Africans and African Americans talk to one another? How do they understand one another? And I also have to confess that there's a part of me that secretly longs for utopia. I hide it often, but really, I just want a world where everyone gets along. So I think that part of me that longs for utopia kind of wants to, wants to present the possibility of better communication. But I think it's important to do it honestly, right? So, doing it honestly means doing it in a way that can make us uncomfortable. Africans and African Americans are an example. There's mutual misunderstanding on both sides, and mutual, we don't always talk nicely to each other. And sometimes I think we're wasting time fighting one another when, in fact, we are both in a situation where there's a larger oppression that we both suffer from. But I think when I started to travel more, that's when I became much more interested in blackness outside of America. When I went to Colombia, when I went to, no, it wasn't even Bogota, it was in, my brain isn't working.
Medellin?
No, I didn't go to Medellin. Starts with a C. Yes, Catarina. And there was a woman who there was there's just a gathering of people, and she did a welcome dance. And it was just like my grandmother. Honestly, I just could not believe. And in that situation, I was in fact in tears. And that's the moment when I became really interested in, I thought, my goodness, my people are here, So I've become increasingly interested in that, which is why I could not help but in this have one of my characters say something about, I didn't know there were so many people in Brazil, black people in Brazil. Yeah. That was important. That was my way of sort of saying to Brazilians, what the hell? You're hiding your black people?
Infelizmente, sim. Acho que em algum momento o Brasil esteve escondendo pessoas negras, ou foi um projeto político no Brasil no final do 19, começo do 20, que aprendêssemos nós, pessoas negras, a negar, inclusive, nossa identidade. E é uma pena pensar que, no Brasil, em diferentes lugares do mundo, ainda, as pessoas pensem a literatura de um jeito tão restrito, que é Imaginar que ela estaria alheia à política, a questões do mundo, a essa complexidade, como, por exemplo, o seu texto apresenta, e entendam isso a partir de como se isso fosse uma temática isolada e não envolvesse um labor, uma elaboração estética profundíssima sobre o mundo, uma reflexão filosófica sobre o mundo. Às vezes é exaustivo ter que estar o tempo inteiro repetindo e dizendo, é muito cansativo.
But I think we have to keep doing it. Yeah. It's exhausting, but we have to keep doing it because if we don't, nobody will.
Então, ainda bem que eu disse no começo que eu estava emocionada, né, com esse momento. Chimamanda, te ouvir falar sobre o amor, eu fiquei ainda mais emocionada e tocada, e pensando na composição das personagens que estão nesse livro, escrevendo em primeira pessoa e no diálogo com a família, principalmente na relação mãe e filhas. Você poderia contar um pouco do processo de criação dessas cenas específicas ou desses encontros nesse livro, como esse livro toca nessa questão do amparo entre mulheres, do amparo entre mães e filhas, ou dessa relação afetiva?
I have a daughter she's going to be 10, so I'm interested in mother-daughter relationships. But actually, I think that really this book is about my mother. So losing my mother was just really catastrophic for me. And I just hadn't, I think in the way that when my mother died, I realized that I had taken my mother for granted. I just assumed my mother would always be there. And so losing her was very difficult. And so I had a lot of, mourning my mother was very complicated and different from mourning my father. Mourning my father was simpler. I was a daddy's girl, I adored him, I could find no fault in my father. And there were faults, but I just would not find them. But with my mother, I felt that, and I think this is true for many mother-daughter relationships, it was more complex. I felt that I was often too quick to judge her, And when I lost her, I found myself looking back with a lot of regret. And it's not, my mother and I were very close. We loved each other. My mother was a fantastic mother. She was very protective, always fighting for her children. But I did feel a lot of regret, and I think I think it's there in this book, this kind of, Chia and her mother, Chia's mother is quite different from Zikora's mother. Chia's mother loves herself a lot and doesn't apologize for it. And, people don't like it, but she couldn't be bothered. Zikora's mother has, a lot of trauma in her life, and so it has shaped the way she looks at the world. But beneath that, there's a deep empathy and kindness. I think all of those, this mother, and of course, Kajetsu and her daughter have just this sublime, beautiful connection. And I think, just looking back, I wasn't aware of it when I was writing, but looking back, I think all of that is my way of just trying. I was thinking about my own relationship with my mother. I was thinking about all of the different facets of it. That how much I admired my mother, for example. My mother was, very ambitious, very warm, very beautiful. My mother wanted to feed everybody in the world, so there was always food in our house. And she, and how much I admired that, but also how judgmental I was of her sometimes in ways that, sometimes when she really didn't deserve that kind of judgment. But also how blind I was to how many things she had to deal with. I think women, I think sometimes it's easier for men to be lovable because they're really not dealing with as much as women are dealing with. And so I think I was sometimes blind to how much my mother carried on her shoulders, how much of the emotional labor she did for the family, how much, just how much she did, and I was blind to that. So I think the mother-daughter relationships in the novel are really about my mother. It's I think sometimes we're dealing with things when we write stories, but it's not in a way that's direct. It's kind of oblique. It's from, you know.
E oblíquo no pensar memória ou narrar, né? Que não é linear, não funciona a partir de uma perspectiva linear, mas toca em traços tão sensíveis e como isso nos sensibiliza. Tem uma parte do seu livro que me sensibilizou profundamente. Tem um momento que a personagem Omelogô, ela pergunta em um diálogo com outra personagem, ela pergunta: Cade, qual é o seu sonho? Eu fiquei muito emocionada nesse trecho, como se naquele momento de leitura uma linha de irmandade estivesse se compondo entre as personagens e mesmo transcendendo o livro e fazendo uma ponte entre eu, leitora, entre você, escritora. E, nesse mesmo instante, eu pensei como ainda é inaugural lermos em livros esse enredo de mulheres negras se cuidando, se amando, se protegendo, e como uma pergunta que pode parecer tão simples pode trazer uma carga de complexidade e de reflexão tão profunda sobre a sociedade, sobre o Brasil. E, enfim, pensei especificamente no Brasil, mas sobre o mundo, ou essas mulheres negras em diáspora, que é essa filosofia do ter direito ao sonho, do poder sonhar. Se a gente pensa nessas mães, nessa demanda tão grande, em qual momento essas mulheres se encontram nessa perspectiva afetiva? E aí, nesse momento, eu fiquei imediatamente com vontade de sair perguntando a todas as mulheres qual era o seu sonho. Quero te perguntar, nesse momento, qual é o seu sonho?
You tell me yours first.
O meu sonho agora é terminar meu novo livro, que eu estou obcecada. Só penso nisso na escrita desse livro, que eu estou com essa personagem, uma personagem que está ali nessa região da Guiné e da Benin, está na Bahia, mas ela é oriunda dessa região do começo do século XIX. Então, meu sonho atual é terminar e seguir escrevendo. E o seu?
Amen to that. I understand, where you are right now. I completely understand that all you want to do, all you want to think about, all you want to do. I'm sure even being here, I know you're happy to be here, but I think I think a part of you is thinking, I could be writing. Because I actually find myself feeling that very often. I mean, now, I finished Dream Count, and I knew, of course, that I would have to go and promote it, and I'm very happy promoting it because this book is so special to me. But honestly, sometimes I'm thinking I just really want to be quiet and write. I don't want to. I love you all, but I really don't want to. I just want quiet. I want to be at home. But you're right about that. And also, Melogo asks Kadi because many women like Kadi sometimes think that, of course, they have dreams. We're human, we dream. But they sometimes think that maybe their dreams are not worthy, maybe. And so there's, and I really love that moment as well, because I think for Kadiatu realizes that Omelogo respects her, and Omelogo sees her, right? And Omelogo, I think there's just a really wonderful connection there. And what I love about it is that it's a connection between women who are quite different. Women who ordinarily really, we don't expect Kadi, who is not educated, who is a hotel maid, and Omelogo, who's this, hyper-successful banker. But there is a connection, and most of all, there's mutual respect, and that, for me, is meaningful. My dream is to keep writing. I dream about writing. I want to be alive to write the books I want to write. And the reason I say this is that since I lost my parents, I've become almost obsessed with thinking about dying. and thinking about mortality all the time. And it's good and bad. So I'm always thinking, I hope I'm alive for long enough to write all the books I want to write. My other dream is that I want to be here to raise my children. I have twin boys who are 1, and so I really want to be healthy, to raise them to be the men I want them to be. And the third dream, no, I won't tell you. I won't tell you the third dream.
Oh.
No. So, but you know what you said about asking women, I'm also, I just love the idea. And I do that. I've been doing that since this book came out, where I say to me, what's your dream? And sometimes I think that women have dreams that they have put away. Dreams that they have locked up in their hearts. And because generally I think women are socialized, you think about it, and in so many cultures, women are socialized to think of love as sacrifice in a way that men are not. So it's women who, and motherhood, of course, plays into this. You're supposed to put yourself back. You're supposed to think about the welfare of your children, of your husband. You're supposed to, and so often it's women who put their dreams away. And I hope that this novel, if anything, makes women think about those dreams that they've put away. Bring them out. Bring them out and look at them.
Isso acontece. Isso acontece. Esse livro cumpre tantas funções, mas uma delas é essa, é nos fazer sonhar. É fazer com que os sonhos que estejam aprisionados no nosso coração se libertem. Eu acho que a arte faz isso, só a arte talvez faça isso com tanta potencialidade. E a literatura faz isso, ela traz para nós essa possibilidade de ampliar nossas perspectivas no mundo, e esse é um jeito de sonhar. Agora, enquanto você estava falando, eu fui pensando, é a literatura também um jeito de produzir imortalidade? E, de algum modo, o livro fica, a história ficará, e seguirá libertando muito. Espero que chegue um momento que os sonhos estejam aprisionados, não por tantas opressões ligadas a machismo, a racismo, que a gente consiga alcançar esse lugar maior de liberdade. Espero que esse momento seja alcançado. Mas você pensa nessa perspectiva, quando está escrevendo, de meus filhos vão poder ler esse livro. Agora, inclusive, no Brasil, a gente está também com o seu livro para as infâncias aqui. Como é também essa relação, esse diálogo entre esse trânsito entre escrever, pensando nessa relação familiar com sua mãe, mas também com seus filhos?
I'm not even sure that I want my children to read what I write. My daughter has very strong views about everything, so I'm worried. I'm worried about what she'll think. It's interesting, that idea of, the book staying on when you're gone. And I've always felt as a writer that my books are much more important than I am. That the novel, I think, is much greater than the novelist. I think that the work itself really is what matters. But I don't really think about legacy. I feel that that's what men spend their time doing. Men, I mean, no, I do, if people want to think about, but honestly, I think, sometimes a man publishes his first novel, and already he's talking about legacy. And I'm thinking, well, get to work, right? So I hope that I'm able to keep working. And honestly, we don't know what happens when we die, right? And I sometimes feel that what if we did more with now, with what we have? When something about funerals, and when people die and everyone writes lovely things and people turn up, I don't know, it makes me feel ambivalent, because I wish we did that when people were alive. When my mother died, there were people who came to us and told us the most incredible stories about my mother that we did not know. There are women who who came and said, there's a particular woman, and there were many of them who told stories like that. You know, your mother gave me a job, she told us. And she said, my mother said to her, she wasn't fully qualified, she was just a little less qualified, but my mother gave her the job. And my mother said to her, I'm giving you this job because you're a woman, and don't you dare let me down. And I just loved that story. And then this man who was, at the time in Nigeria, a minister in the government, told us that my mother, when he was a student, had really saved him from being expelled from the university, and that he owed my mother his career. And we did not know. My mother, he never told her. And so sometimes I just feel that maybe we should do more with the now, you know? And so I really do not spend my time thinking about what will happen when I'm gone. I don't know if I'll know, right? I don't know if sitting at the throne next to St. Peter, I will see what's happening with the book. No, but no, I don't think. I don't know. I don't know if I want my daughter to read my books. Maybe she can read them when I'm gone.
Acho que seus livros sempre vão ocupar esse lugar de agora. Acho que a literatura ocupa um lugar de agora. Essa sensação sempre que a gente tem de estar lendo um texto, literário, e isso às vezes parece até que é sobre nós. Tem muita gente que acha, olha, essa parte do texto é sobre mim, essa música. Eu acho que isso diz desse instaurar um agora. Bom, tem um trecho aqui do seu livro que eu queria que a gente lesse. Eu acho que Stephanie falou no começo que a gente teria perguntas do público, mas eu posso seguir. Ah, certo. Olha que pena, porque não deveria ter perguntado. Não, claro que deveria, porque todo mundo está aqui que quer também fazer perguntas. E claro que eu vou deixar. Bom, tem o capítulo que é sobre a Kadiatou, que já comentamos aqui, que tem essa relação muito forte de ser uma mulher fula, e essa relação dos fulas está muito associada ao narrar, ao contar. E tem um trecho quando ela vive uma situação de opressão que o livro diz, a narrativa diz de um jeito tão potente sobre esse lugar ainda de violência na sociedade. Para quem quiser guardar, depois a leitura está na página 226. A narradora diz: Kadiatou entendeu, naquele momento, que o homem não a considerava um ser humano como ele. Ela era uma coisa a ser possuída, invadida e descartada, e isso a amedrontou. Bom, esse trecho, que ele, somado dentro do livro, ele traz uma reflexão profunda sobre o ser, esse lugar da existência, essa possibilidade de pensar ou de tomar conta de uma posição de si. E que, nessa perspectiva de pensar isso sobre uma mulher negra, está muito associado ao pensar a historiografia. Então, é muito refinado como o seu romance ele vai dialogando com a história ou com as opressões da história a partir dessas falas, a partir de falas que fazem, de novo e novamente, sempre, as mulheres irem tomando um lugar de posição de si, um lugar de ser, a partir de um questionar. Será que não estou sendo considerada humana? E a gente sabe que, infelizmente, em alguns momentos, não temos essa consideração de humanidade. E essa reflexão no livro, junto com as ações que vão acontecendo, elas vão se encadeando em uma potência muito grande e que, a partir dessa conexão com essa personagem, ser de um lugar original que tem a palavra como o sagrado, o contar histórias, o dizer de si, fica grandioso, Chimamanda. Esse foi parte do seu processo de escrita, do seu processo de criação, escolher essas histórias, essas 4 personagens que você escolheu nesse livro, para que elas se encaixassem desse modo tão incrível com a história e, ao mesmo tempo, tão libertador, porque se está falando, ela está questionando o lugar de humanidade, ao mesmo tempo ela está ouvindo de outra mulher na sequência que está perguntando a ela qual é o seu sonho. Então, você foi de uma generosidade com as pessoas leitoras, inclusive, absurda, porque talvez nós não conseguíssemos seguir adiante se o livro não fosse nesse trânsito o tempo inteiro entre o revelar situações de violência, mas, ao mesmo tempo, ser acolhida imensamente por outras mulheres no texto.
Yes. I think you've said it all. No, honestly. You said something about, you said, when she's asking that, and it's this moment of terror when you're being assaulted and, you realize you're just a thing in this person's, but at the same time, and so you said, of course, we're not seen as human. And that is true in many situations. But I think what is also true and what is important to remember is that Kajiatu knew in that moment that she was human. He did not think she was, but she knew she was. And I've always felt that even in the deepest oppression and suppression and all of those things, that the oppressed know that they deserve better. We know we're human. We know we're beautiful. We know we're worthy. And I really think that is just as important as recognizing and acknowledging that many people don't acknowledge that. That it's important to me.
Isso é magnífico. Obrigada por isso, por escrever, deixando essas brechas. Várias perguntas aqui. E, junto com as perguntas no bilhete, que o nosso tempo... 10 minutos. Um bilhete dizendo que o nosso tempo está acabando. Bom, vou seguir aqui a ordem para fazer... Escolho 2? Ok. Vou sortear. Rafaela, temos uma pergunta aqui. Uma pergunta do público. Rafaela te pergunta: como tem sido a recepção de suas obras nas escolas e universidades? E como lidar com a forte onda de censuras? E acho que a gente pode pensar isso de modo mais amplo, né? Ou principalmente nos Estados Unidos agora.
Can I see Rafaela? Hi, Rafaela. Hi, Adriana. In schools and universities, I'm told that in the US, my book has been on, one of those famous banned lists, which, for me is a badge of honor because there's such wonderful books on those lists. So, and the people banning them can't even read. So I know that my books are read in the US. I know that in schools I've spoken to students, and it's always, I know Purple Hibiscus is one, and I know that I think Americana is the most widely read. And it's always been very moving for me to hear from, especially the teachers, who say that that Americana makes it easier for them to talk about difficult subjects, particularly race. Right? Because I think there's also humor in Americana, and sometimes humor is such a universal language that it enables you to talk about what's difficult. In Nigeria, it's Purple Hibiscus that is, in Nigeria, and actually in Anglophone West Africa, in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, Purple Hibiscus is on most of the secondary school syllabuses. And, I can't tell you how, it means so much to me. It means so much to me that sometimes I get fan mail from, some young person in Kenya, and they're writing something about purple hibiscus. And for me, it's always lovely, but also a bit painful when people tell me, you told my story. Because, the girl in purple hibiscus, her story is not a very happy one. So, but I also find, what I find interesting is how in Nigeria, and I think in most of Africa, people are more likely to think that fiction is really my story. So sometimes people have said to me, I'm so sorry, right? And I remember actually once doing an event in Lagos years ago, Purple Hibiscus, and I was signing books, and this woman came and she said she wanted to walk across the table, around the table, and come to me because she said, I want to look at your feet. And because in the novel, something terrible happens to the girl's feet. And so she said, I want to look at your feet. And I was like, what is going on? And then so I said to her, no, it's not me. But she looked at me like, you're lying. And then I would go with my father to many of my events for my books. I took my parents, almost to everything I did. And people would be looking at my father in a very funny way. And I think to them, my father did not look. Like, my father had a very gentle demeanor. So they kind of looked confused. Like, he doesn't look like, the man in the book. But but it means so much to me to be read by young people in Africa. Like, it means everything to me. And censorship, my general approach is, I'm just not going to give in to censorship. And I am willing to accept the consequences that come with refusing censorship. I think that, and someone asked me a question actually earlier today about if you're saying that people can read it to mean that you're saying that, writers should be allowed to write prejudiced and bigoted things. And I said yes. Because I don't want writers to write prejudiced or bigoted things, but I think that when we censor people in the name of censoring the bad, we will censor the good. And it also matters who's defining prejudice. Right now, the world is so crazy that in America, when you talk about racism that is a real thing, people on the right will tell you that you're a racist, So if they had the power to censor, they would censor you. I mean, so many histories would be just completely squashed because many people define these histories as somehow, don't talk about that, leave it alone, you're going to make people feel bad. So I just really think that, yes, I think everyone should be allowed to write whatever the hell they want to write. If somebody writes something that's bigoted and prejudiced, we can always write back, But, yeah, so my view really is that, and I wish that there was more, I think publishers also have a role to play because I think that the understandable fear that so many people have about, someone's going to come after you, and it's terrible, but I think it is important enough for us to stand strong. I think that we need more collective courage. I think that people who believe in the freedom of ideas should speak up more. Because I really think that it's a minority of people who do this kind of crazy censoring, both on the left and the right. It's a minority. And I just worry, I care so much about multiple stories. I care so much about literature. I care so much about ideas being free. I want to learn every day. And so the censorship bothers me because even just on a very personal, selfish level, I think about what I'm not learning. What stories have not been told, So, yeah, I won't. I mean, I could go on and on, but I'll stop.
Bom, temos uma pergunta aqui da escritora Fernanda Bastos. Ela te pergunta, você já mencionou o caso que inspirou Cadiator, mas gostaria que você falasse mais sobre o desfecho e o julgamento das pessoas sobre a vítima. Você até mesmo menciona esse mal-estar em epílogo no romance. O status da imigrante africana mudou?
Whose question was that?
Fernanda Bastos.
Fernanda. Hello. Okay, I'll answer the last part. The status of African immigrants, has it changed? No. I mean, I suppose Haitians are, not Africans, but they're still black people. And as we know, they were accused of eating cats and dogs. That's not... Okay. I think the status of immigrants in general. No, I should be more specific. Immigrants who are not white in America. I think that their status is in fact even more dire. It's not a good time to be a person of color who is not who was not born in America, but who now lives in America. I think it's a terrible time. I think particularly for Mexicans. So the story, the woman who inspired Kajiatu, her name is Nafisatu Jallo. She worked as a hotel maid in New York, and it happened in 2011. And she walked into a hotel room, and this man assaulted her. She walked in to clean his room. She knocked on the door, and she thought the room was empty. And so he just assaulted her. So clearly, I mean, one of the things that I found really troubling about this is that this was a man who was lying in wait for whoever the maid was who would come into his room. And there's something about that, speaking of dehumanizing, he was just waiting for a female body, any female body. And because, of course, this person was a hotel maid, to him, she was nothing. And I'm telling this story in this way. I'm not using the word allegedly, as I'm sure the legal people want me to. And the reason I'm not is because I believe this woman. I believe her story. I believe her. And I followed the story very closely because, and of course, the man was Dominique Strauss-Kahn, and he was many people thought he would be the next president of France. And I followed the story for a number of reasons. Obviously, I always care when it's stories of sexual assault because I think women have just suffered too much from it. But also, this woman was African. She was West African like me. And yes, she was different. She was a French speaker. She was from Guinea. She wasn't formally educated. But I felt that I recognized her. And I think it's why her story maybe pained me more than, others pain me, but has pained me, That's a very Nigerian way when we want to emphasize, like, it pained me. So, and I followed it. And so he was arrested. And I thought this was wonderful. I thought America was fantastic. They're arresting this very important man. And then she went through interviews. And at some point, she went through interviews with the prosecutor's office in New York. And at some point, they announced that, before that, actually, the media covered her in just the most dehumanizing way. They made up stories. They said she was a prostitute. They said she was part of a prostitution ring that existed in the hotel. I mean, really horrible stories. And at some point, I think her lawyers felt that the prosecutors were encouraging this. And so they put her out, they had her do an interview because they felt that it was important to have her tell her story to the people. Now, many lawyers thought this was a bad idea because, apparently you're not supposed to, talk publicly about it. And the interview itself, in my opinion, did not go very well, but it wasn't set up to go very well. She's not a native English speaker. She's a woman who's naturally quite shy. And suddenly you have her in an interview with an American journalist who doesn't get her, who doesn't know the world she comes from. And she's speaking English, which is not her language. They could easily have gotten a translator and had her speak fuller. So, and often, and this happens with, when we don't know a language well, we make up for it with gestures. And when you're African, you gesture anyway. So now imagine that Africans, we're an expressive people. So we're talking, you see a bunch of Nigerians talking and you think they're about to fight. Hey, so that time I was telling you now, right? So now imagine that. And then add to that, she's speaking a language that's not hers. She was gesturing a lot. The reason I say this is that a friend of mine said to me after the interview, I did not believe her. And when I said why, she said she was too melodramatic. I never forgot that because, and I felt deeply pained by that because this is a woman I care, a friend I loved, and I thought, my God, so this is how you see an African woman. And then her case was dropped, and I remember where I was when I saw the headline news that it was dropped, and so of course I went to read about it. And her case was dropped because they said she had lied on her asylum application years before. And suddenly, his lawyers were out on TV calling her liar, liar, liar. And suddenly, people thought that she had lied about the sexual assault. Right? So that became the story about this woman. Later, she actually sued him in civil court, and she won. But to me, civil court is not justice. You know, Americans think money is justice, but I don't think it is. There are many people who still believe that she lied because that was the constant story that people heard. And so writing about this character, which really I did not even plan to do, I really feel the character just kind of came to me. But when I started to write it, I realized that for me it was about making this person human, giving her dignity that had been forgotten when she was being covered in the news, you know? And so I've never met this woman. I did not want to meet her actually when I was writing it because sometimes I think people don't really understand fiction. So I made up everything except for the sexual assault. So I imagine that, you know, and I know she's an African like me, I know how my people, I imagine that she would say to me, but that's not my story, that never happened, what are you doing, right? And then I would have trouble explaining, no, it's fiction, it's not really you, you know? But now I'm thinking that I'm going to try and meet her, and I just hope that she knows that this is, that this came from love, that it came, you know, I just hope that. And honestly, there's a part of me that just wishes that she would still get justice. You know, I still wish that for her. But yeah.
Só para dizer que quem quiser saber mais dessa história de amor, o livro está aqui já. Deixamos esse mais que convite para que vocês encontrem essa história de amor magnífica. Chimamanda, muitíssimo obrigada por esse momento aqui conosco.
Thank you. This was lovely. Thank you for being here. And also, I would like to say thank you to the translator. She's very, very good.
Beatriz.
Thank you.